Right. Thank you all for coming. And I'm very happy to welcome you to my talk, Getting More with Design Tokens. My name is Mikolaj, and I mostly work as a designer and developer. But I also would like to get you know a bit better. So before we move any further, could you tell me like how many front-end developers do we have in the room? All right, that's I think a majority. Do we have anyone who works or worked as a designer? Yes, there is a person. Amazing. All right, so we have both developers and designers in this room. That's so nice. Okay, and then maybe one more question. Who ever heard about design tokens before coming to this conference and seeing the title of this talk? Okay, that's not longer a majority, but we have a few people. All right. So what do we usually perceive as design tokens? Or what are design tokens like most well known as? If you search on the web for like design tokens in general, you will probably find quite a few possible descriptions. And usually, probably like the one that is most popular or that you'll stumble upon sooner or later is more or less like that design tokens are an agnostic way to store variables such as typography, spacing, so your design system can be shared across platforms like iOS, Android, and web. And yeah, this is exactly what design tokens are. And this is maybe how they've been used in the first place and why they have been created. And what it exactly means, we'll try to explore it in a moment. But I also would like to tell you that even if you heard about design tokens in the past and you kind of connect this topic with design systems, with different platforms, probably with quite big, robust products, living in multiple environments, this still doesn't mean that this is everything you can do with them, that you need a huge design system, an extensive style guide to make use of design tokens in your daily life. So yeah, we'll get down to that. And okay, so why design tokens and what this is actually about? Imagine that you're starting your new project, like a brand new project from scratch. You can choose whatever technology you want. Your design team choose their tools, whatever they want. Basically, you have full freedom. And usually in such a case, you choose the option that is most suitable for the certain project, for you personally, for your skill set, for the team. And when you start off, at least at the very beginning, it rather seems easy in terms of getting your hand around the repository and the basic set of what you created. I mean, there are a lot of important decisions that are maybe not that easy, but once you've done those decisions, you kind of remember what you've done for the first few weeks. You know that your assets are here, this is the logic, this is more or less what you want the architecture to be. And also for the first few weeks, usually the team stays more or less the same. So there are no people completely new to the things, everybody is new. And yeah, this is probably the very exciting, pleasant part of the project where everybody's starting to do something new and create. And also at this stage, many people probably don't really feel a very distinctive urge to, let's say, write documentation and yeah, and think about maintainability and scalability in a very serious way, because it's still small, it just works. We don't know what we're actually doing just yet. And from the perspective of a designer, and for a front-end developer, on this visual part, let's say like this front part of the front end. You're starting to build some kind of a library, no matter how the project is big. I mean, you make some design decisions. You choose some colors, you choose some typography. Well, you decide on some rules that are global to the whole project. And usually you just remember them. And you know that this orange is doing this thing, this blue color is doing another thing. This is like more or less clear at the beginning. And let's say you have this orange color. And first of all, you've chosen this orange color for some warning message as a background. And then later, yeah, project is getting bigger, so your beautiful orange color is also getting more use cases. And you apply it to some text. And later, maybe also to some icon. And eventually have another people joining the project. And they find what you already created. They not necessarily know what was your logic behind it. If you haven't documented properly, if you haven't keep consistency between your design tool and your code, and if you, let's say, you're not keeping track of all the changes and explain this all to the new person, they will just use their best judgment to make the next move. They will, let's say, sit down to an illustration. Let's say Illustrator joins the project, and they want to add something orange to an illustration. So they go through the files and, oh yeah, this is orange. Why should we add another orange to the project? So they color picker, okay, here we go, a beautiful orange illustration. And what a front-end developer does then? They usually just see what color it is, and they use the same SAS variable or whatever it was that was used for this color before. And the problem is that this variable usually is named like color warning or something like that. And this orange illustration have absolutely nothing to do with warnings. And this can seem completely innocent when you have like 3 views, 2 colors, and 4 typography styles. But once you reach a moment when you have 10 people on a team, 4 different platforms, you start making some rewrite after a year and a half because the whole stack suddenly again seems to be outdated, then the problems are going. And this is the moment when design tokens can really come in useful. And yeah, maybe enough talking. Let me show you just like a quick demo of how I use design tokens in my daily life. So for this purpose, I probably would have to change my settings a bit. Okay, this is challenging. Let's find some user experience of a Mac computer. Okay, mirror displays. By the way, I know that my English is basically far from perfect, so if there's anything you don't understand on the go, if you'd like me to repeat something or to paraphrase or whatever, I think we have plenty of time. Don't hesitate to just raise your hand and let me know. I will be more than happy to repeat whatever you want. Okay, you should now see my whole screen, and that's amazing. Okay, so what is this? This is probably like one of the simplest projects you've ever seen in your life. This is a single HTML page with a few unordered lists, a few headings, and a few pieces of SVG, period. That's basically all. And this page was in the first place designed in Figma. Figma being like quite popular UI design tool right now. And here is the original design. And what's funny about the way this design is created is that, let's say I want to change some colors. And I don't know, create a Christmas theme for my website. So I would go to my styles in Figma and change the style that is responsible for the background color. And I don't know, what would make a Christmas theme? Some red? Yeah, I think this is Christmas. And then I would probably want to also change my text color. And oh yeah, this sounds like a beautiful idea. Just the best possible accessibility choice. Maybe let's make the contrast a bit better. Just bearable. Never do it in your real life. And yeah, here we go. New colors. And usually what you would do in this situation, you would just go to, I don't know, Avocode, Zeppelin, or to just to the color picker, copy the hex, HSL, whatever you want, and paste it in your code. But what you can do in this particular case is I can go to my code, run my build command, and what happens then is as long as we have internet connection, basically the website updates automatically. And this is not only about the colors. This is also, for example, about the layout. So if I switch on the grid, and this would require myself to remember shortcuts. Oh, no, that was definitely not this shortcut. Neither this. Oh, come on. I never remember what was that. Layout grids? Maybe they are just red and we don't see them. Yeah, let's presume that's the explanation. Yeah, there should be some guides here showing the layout. Maybe I just chosen quite an unfortunate color for the background. But I also have this little components named spacers, which should be, where is that? Okay, I grouped everything like 100 times. Okay, so more or less this is how the layout is built. There are also some guides. You need to believe me, they are there. They are just red. So the whole layout is built on a component named a spacer that defines like most of the spacing in the design. And here is our style guide. Here is our little spacer. And let's say I can decide that I will change my spacer to 25 pixels. And right now, if I run my build command again, the whole layout should, without any further change, just become much more condensed. So let's explore what is happening here under the hood. And this would require me to go back to my presentation, which I would be welcome to do. Okay, here we go. Yep. So what is happening? The page itself, it's a single HTML page that is generated from a static site generator called 11t, and which is, by the way, a very nice and I think user-friendly Jamstack tool. If you'd ever like to try playing with Jamstack and static site generators, Element is definitely a nice starting point. And what does it mean to us is that I write my HTML and my CSS using some templating engine. In this case, that would be Nunjax. And let's say every time I want to deploy my website, I commit my stuff, I push this to GitHub, and then there's integration between GitHub and Netlify, so all this stuff automatically flies to Netlify, and then Netlify runs my build command trying to deploy it to the rest of the world. And what happens at this point is that using the Nunjax engine, and it basically fills my HTML with all the, and CSS with all the data that it needs. So if you have like a list of links, it just takes some links from a JSON file and generates a correct HTML. And if it has CSS, it takes some data and puts it inside of this CSS, also from a JSON file. And where do we have the JSON from? So imagine we're the Netlify, we run the build command, and there's a file that is being run during this process named surprise surprise design tokens.js. And what happens in this file is that we communicate with an API of Figma. And we're really lucky that Figma is a web-based tool, which means for us that we basically don't need to sync, upload anything. Basically, everything you design in Figma is already in the cloud, is always there, so you just need to get it. You send a request to Figma saying, hey, can I get some details about this certain Figma file? And Figma says, sure, this is where I am here, and here are your details. And then we get a response with a whole lot of information about your design file. Basically, like from our perspective, lots of clutter that we completely don't need. So we run this JSON through a few custom functions. Eventually, we end up with design tokens JSON file. And this is what happens like in this file. So those are our actual design tokens. As you can see, there's not much of them. In this case, we have two categories of those tokens. There are colors and there are spacings. And each of the token is basically a pair. There's a key and there's a value, right? So let's say there's a color dark and there's a value in RGB. There's a variable called some spacing under the category of spacing. And it's large, big, whatever, and there's a value. By the way, notice that this value for the spacers are unitless. They don't have a unit. This will be quite important later on. And what happens next? Usually, at this stage, when you have like a huge, mature design system and a big product, you rather transform those tokens into like platform-specific variables. Let's say translate them into SAS variables and then inject your SAS variables in your like CSS code. In this case, just to make it quicker, what I've done is I just like rudely inserted those variables directly in my CSS without any middle steps. This is probably not the ideal way to do it in most of the cases, but it definitely works. And yeah, this is just plain CSS with Nunjax engine put on top of that. Fun fact, yes, if you ever used Nunjax, Nunjax works pretty well with all the file formats. It's not only for HTML, you can generate CSS, images, whatever you want with Nunjax. Okay, and now if we go back to the description I gave you earlier, where this is not exactly about design systems, right? You haven't seen like my personal iOS app and Android app and web environment. There was no huge system of components, but I still use it. Why? So, in other words, like when would you need or would like to use design tokens? When I hear this kind of question, I also kind of like to think about design tokens in quite a similar way as I think about design systems in general. And some time ago, I was listening to a super nice interview conducted by Vitaly Friedman with Brad Frost. Vitaly is a founder of Smashing Mag, and Brad Frost being the creator of atomic design, one of the crucial concepts that contributed to design systems. And during this interview, you can find it on Smashing Magazine if you'd like, Vitaly asks Brad exactly this question, right? Why should I need a design system? And this is what Brad replies. He says that, yeah, like usually we think of design systems like with big companies having huge products and using the same components across many different websites and apps and environments, platforms. But this is not all to the story. And to some extent, every website can benefit from component-driven architecture applied to design and development principles. And I think what Brad was trying to say is that no matter how big is your project and no matter if you have all those platforms, environments, different tools, you still can benefit a lot during your process by thinking about how design systems are done and learning from them even on a much smaller scale. And I also think that we can paraphrase this sentence a bit and say something like every project can benefit from system-driven architecture applied to design and development principles. And what I would mean here by the system is a combination of basically three factors, I mean, usually. First of them being the tokens, the smallest possible reusable parts of your system. Then the components, which is like the functional bits, which build the system, and eventually the principles. So the principles that define how those components and tokens should be used. Okay, so what those design tokens actually are, and what are their main characteristics? First of all, as we already mentioned, design tokens should be platform agnostic. And this usually means at least two things. First, keeping them in a format that is agnostic. So JSON or YAML are usually quite good examples and commonly implemented. But it also means another thing, that the values of your design tokens should also be platform agnostic. And do not have a unit if it's not necessary. And this is what you've seen with the spacings in the example. So as you notice, those spacer, they did not have unit like rems or amps or pixels in the JSON file. They've been just stored as plain numbers. And what you do is you store your tokens in a platform agnostic format and also like strip the unit apart until the point when those tokens are used on a particular platform, so you know which unit to apply. And this way, just your system gets much more versatile and also universal. It makes it easier to add more platforms. It makes it easier to, let's say, do a rewrite. It makes it easier to also explain it to others and just strip yet another layer of logic and decisions out of the source of truth, which actually should not contain this logic. Because design tokens are not about should I use RAMs or AMs in this particular case. They're more about what this is from a design perspective. Okie doke. Okay, so what's next? Yeah, so as you notice, like the tokens that I created, they have usually one value. So yeah, we categorize them to make it easier to read. But each token should have one value, like key and a value. If you have like multiple values, that's probably a good sign that you should use just multiple tokens. But as long as they are single value, that also should be multi-purpose. So if you have a value that is used only once across the whole project, then probably you don't really have to make it into a token. It would be really just fair to use it as whatever it was before. But once the certain value is getting repeated over and over in a project, that's a good sign that maybe it's a good moment to turn it into a token before it, scales and you have no longer a control over it. And as this orange color, later another person joins and they decide to make this orange color a bit darker. I don't know, because it was used for text and to increase the contrast for accessibility purposes, and then usually a developer is completely stuck. They do not know what to do because this single orange color was in a few hexes that are kind of similar but not the same. Here was a SAS variable, here was another variable, here was just a hex, and you never know what to update. Same as with designs. Sometimes it just, you update one thing, it influences 20 different screens. And how do you know which of those 20 screens that was? As long as you don't document it, as long as you don't name it properly, you never know. And this brings us all to the next topic that escalated much too quickly. But yeah, let's just follow this list. So they should be mutable. So you should have the confidence of changing your token without causing some very bad unexpected changes. So if this is, let's say, a spacing, you should be able to make it bigger or smaller without breaking the whole layout. If this is a color, you should be able to change this color and then get this particular color updated only in the place when you know that it will be updated, only where you expect. And yeah, design related. All right. So what I mean by that is that design tokens, kind of by definition, should be related to design. So we rather don't store in design tokens things as copy or environmental variables or SEO information. We rather keep it strictly related to design. And what is that? So this is everything that you create in your design tool, first of all. So everything related to dimensions, to spacing, to typography, to colors, to your brand. But this is also all those things that are a bit less tangible. So animations, set indexes, media queries. And at this point, you can already start noticing that probably some good cooperation between designer and developer is needed, because not all designers know what Z-index is, and not all developers are that fully aware of all the properties that build typography. Yeah, we'll get down to that. And in the meantime, let's take a look at the main benefits of using design tokens in your project, no matter what the size is. And yeah, definitely the biggest benefit, why would you like to use them, is better maintainability and scalability. It's not a lot of work to implement design tokens if you start from scratch, but there's plenty of time you can save once you implemented it correctly. And this basically is strictly related to quality and consistency. You operate on a closed set of choices, and this helps you a lot with consistency on many different levels. This helps you with consistency in designs. So when you design, you know what choices do you have, or what can you build from, and it helps you make more, fully aware design decisions. But this helps you with consistency also on a visual level of once your designs are coded. So you know which color matches which color, how everything should look like, there's no guessing. And this also is about consistency under the hood in your code. So you know that everything is actually used the way it should be, and it follows the logic that was previously created by a designer. And eventually, it's also about consistency between design and development in terms of how the cooperation works. And there's just, I think, much less friction and much less field for misinterpretation. Flexibility. As we said a moment ago, design tokens by definition should be mutable, and this allows us for much better flexibility than we usually have. So imagine that you want to build a dark mode or another layout for already existing app. With design tokens, usually that's easier. Let's say when you build this dark mode, you already have a framework for which color serves what purpose. And I think a good starting point is just replacing the whole set of tokens with another set of tokens, and most of things should work fine. Of course, you will need to adjust it to some extent, but it's still much, much easier, much more of a fluent process than just figuring out how to do it in a project that was never taught in this way in the first place. And educational value. And what I mean by educational value is what I said on the previous slide, that it's basically impossible as a designer to work with design tokens if you don't understand how they are being used later. And it's also impossible to work with design tokens as a developer if you don't understand, at least to some extent, where they come from and what each of them mean. But this can also be a challenge, right? And there are other challenges when we talk about design tokens. First of them, most obvious, is keeping the tokens up to date. You can use tools like we did, try to sync them, but you don't have to. You can also do it manually. And you definitely don't have to use Figma. You can set up integrations with Sketch, with Adobe XD, with basically, I think, whatever tool you like. But still keeping consistency and keeping all your tokens up to date is a challenging task, because this is like a lot of things to think about in the meantime. And we don't live in an ideal world, at least just yet. And what it means for designers and front-end developers is that there are some distinctive differences between platforms, between browsers, between different machines, and you never can be fully sure what your design will look like for the end user. You cannot just take for granted that it will look the same as for you, right? And for design tokens, this means that you can pull all your dimensions, all your spacings and typography variables into the tokens, and then use them for 4 different platforms. But this not necessarily give you the correct result. For example, because there are some differences in how typography parameters such as line height or letter spacing are being interpreted on different platforms. This is also about how let's say, paddings and margins are being calculated. You can suddenly end up with a completely different design depending on what platform you're building for. So you will never avoid some optical tweaks and some platform-specific tweaks and browser-specific and so on. This will definitely help, but you will still have to do some manual work. Another common challenge for design tokens is categorization and naming conventions. And this is, I think, like the same for any kind of guide, library that you would be creating. And this is not different for design tokens. And eventually, ownership and contribution. It is, I think, super important to make it clear who is responsible for design tokens, and also how can you contribute to it. So you avoid, like a hero approach when there's one person defining as a single source of truth all the tokens for the rest of the team to work with. And you eventually, end up with just a single man project when everybody else needs to adjust. This is like a huge no-no. You should always enable everybody on a team to be able to contribute. And this means not only like creating the environment when they feel enabled to, but also just defining the rules. Write documentation, tell them how they can do this. How they should name the things, in which channel or Slack they should write about it, and who should they call for review. And yeah, this is the same as with every other piece of design or any other piece of code. You should all collaborate on that. And if you fail at making everybody on a team feeling a part of it, you will probably end up not using this at all. Because only if people will feel like engaged, they will actually be convinced to use this. And this is this kind of a solution that is, to some extent, you either use it or not. You cannot just use it for some of the cases. I mean, doesn't stop serving the purpose, because you should have this confidence that once you update this certain token, then it updates in all the places that it should. If it updates only in half the places, then there's honestly no good reason to use it anymore. Okay, and this is how we smoothly transition to the best practices, which was just one of them. But also, yes, don't turn everything into a token. So yes, there is a kind of all-in, all-out logic when it comes to design tokens in terms of implementing certain values. You cannot just take a token for half of the values it would be used for. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that you have to use your design tokens for everything. You can start small. You can, let's say, just start using tokens for colors and see how it works, and if you like it, and then scale it to other properties. You can really do it incrementally. It doesn't have to be a huge big bang redesign. And don't build in isolation. And this is a mistake that people do not only when it comes to tokens, but also when it comes to design systems in general. It's really, really hard to build a system, to build any kind of reusable components when you don't know how they are being used in practice. I've seen this kind of projects when I have like a huge corporation and like, hello, here's our job ads. We hire 5 people to build a design system, and then they sit in the single room, very focused, building a design system for a year, crafting components, choosing colors, deliberating about everything inside. And then after a year, they release the huge new design system for the company, and nobody uses it. Nobody uses it because nobody knows how to use it, and it's just completely detached from reality. And that would be the same for design tokens in any form. Rather than creating the whole library of tokens and then, yeah, I'm ready, I can start using them in a project, it's much better to just do them as you go. And once you need something, add it to the library. Once you realize you don't need it, just don't worry to remove it. It's all like a living thing. It doesn't have to be like a masterpiece that you perfect and then, yeah, okay, that's ready for the public. Oh yeah, and getting back to the naming conventions, try not to confuse options with decisions. When it comes to design, but it's, I think, quite a common rule, those are 2 different things. By options, I mean all the possible options for a certain project, like all the possible alterations that you can use. So let's say you have a color palette, and this is a certain hue of orange that you use. This is a certain hue of blue. But this doesn't say you what the certain hue of blue is being used at, right? It can be a brand color, it can be an info message, it can be a call to action button. Those are options. And then you have design decisions. And this is where you look at the options. So, those are the hues that I have available in this project. Let's say I have 3 different hues of orange here, and 3 different hues of red. Which of them do I use to convey an error message? And which of them do I use to convey a warning message? Maybe this orange will be good for warning, and this red will be good for error. And this is like a completely different thing. And it's not like better or worse. Usually we just need both of them. But the most important thing is to not to confuse them with one another. So don't pull color red and color success on the same palette and in the same set of tokens, because this will end up in some serious issues afterwards. Okie doke. Yes, and specify allowed usage. So design tokens are just as any other code. Usually after a few weeks, you don't remember yourself why you created a certain token. You have literally no idea unless you document it properly and specify allowed usage. And this is super crucial for the whole team to be confident about their decisions, and for yourself to be able to build upon this further. So this is basically one of the most common mistakes, that you build a library of tokens without properly documenting them. And as long as at the beginning this may feel super harmless, later it can be like the main reason why your system failed. And the sooner you remember about documenting everything and saying everybody how each token should be used, the better. And the last thing, which is maybe more of like little advice, is that it's much easier to work with these kind of concepts if you first structure your designs properly and you know how the logic behind your code matches the logic of designs. Not only like on, let's say, business logic, but also like on a structural level. And let's say when you build a design system, it's quite a nice practice to match your components in the design tool with the components in your code. Let's say keep the same naming conventions, the same architecture. But this is the same for tokens. And this is, for example, when you can use styles in your design tool. So you use a certain style for multiple values, multiple elements. And then you name the style the same as you later name your token in your code. And then once you update the style in designs, you're super confident that this will update maybe 10 different screens in your designs, but this will also update exactly the same 10 different screens in your actual application. Okay, let's sum up quickly what we just covered. So design tokens, like on a very basic level, are just an agnostic way of managing your design decisions. And I think this is a practice that basically projects of all sizes can benefit from. Even though, yes, this was like in the first place invented for design systems. This is a great tool for design systems, and yeah, can be also used independently. And I think it's nice to think about design tokens a bit like a bridge between design and development that promotes shared knowledge and supports consistency and maintainability. And yeah, that's basically everything that I wanted to share with you today. So thank you a lot for coming. And if you have any questions,